Greetings, I'm John Butler, Investment Director at Southbank Investment Research. Today, I'm joined by Sam Volkering, our in-house technology and innovation expert. There's hardly any technology or innovation of modern times that Sam has not followed closely, and that's certainly the case when it comes to monetary technology. That is, be it blockchain or be it cryptocurrency generally or Bitcoin specifically, Sam's been following it from, well, basically from before anyone else I happen to know. And so it's my pleasure to have him here today. Welcome, Sam.
Thanks, John. Nice to be with you and talking in person.
Fantastic, fantastic. I really wanted to have this chat because you have written quite recently that it appears to you, based on metrics you followed for years, that the situation right now regarding, again, I'm going to generalize here,
Sure.
Blockchain, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, the setting up for this area of, let's face it, it's kind of caught the zeitgeist still, right? Of this area of interest, current interest, is really changing for the better here. And that sounds exciting. Could you please elaborate on that?
Yeah, if you wind back the clock a number of years, so if you can go back to literally the genesis of Bitcoin to 2009 and then into 2010 and 11, we saw a cycle, a price cycle in Bitcoin, when pretty much Bitcoin was the only thing that existed in terms of cryptocurrencies that we know today. Back then, no one really knew what Bitcoin was. And we saw a cycle and we saw a setup of price movement in that era of 2011. And it was driven by a couple of key factors. And we've written about this in the last week about, issues with the traditional financial system, threats, worries, concerns about systemic risk in the financial system, and an increasing amount of adoption. So while a lot of people didn't know about it back then, there were a few things that happened, the Silk Road being the number one thing, the marketplace where you could buy any drug imaginable, where Bitcoin was the core currency of exchange. And so you got this momentum cycle. And then in 2016 and 2017, well, actually there was one in 2013 as well, when we started to get altcoins for the first time. And we saw a huge explosion of altcoin speculation and prices as people started to get around the idea of, okay, well, there are other cryptocurrencies that exist. There's Bitcoin and Litecoin and Darkcoin and Blackcoin and all these other things. And so the speculation mania kind of caught hold and we saw a price cycle. But again, in 2013, there was the similar things, systemic financial risk in the traditional financial system, increasing adoption, and something that we've spoken a little bit about as well over time, the halvening of Bitcoin's release schedule, so to speak. Anyway, so that was second cycle. We saw a third cycle, 2016, 2017. Same issues, financial issues, adoption, growth, price speculation back into the market, another cycle. And we're seeing the same things play out that we then saw again in 2021 and 2020, same thing again, and we're here again. So, I mean, we are in the fifth cycle where we have seen cryptocurrencies go through these winters, these price winters, where the prices in fiat converted currency is down in the doldrums off of spectacular highs. And it's the same thing, financial issues, systemic financial issues in the traditional financial system, growth and adoption, and we're approaching Bitcoin's next halving cycle. So while, the history is never a guarantee of future success, patterns, you've seen patterns before in markets, you can't ignore them. And so the setups are there for what I think is going to be the fifth cycle. And I think that people really need to start to understand a bit more about what drives that in each cycle, and importantly then the opportunities that each of those cycles presents.
Well, that's where, the general observation is a compelling one, but then that's where the attention has to turn to how you think about this more specifically, because in these past cycles, you refer now to some of those cycles being associated with further innovation, with new altcoins and whatnot coming into the market, with new sources of liquidity, new use cases, and so on and so forth. The fact is, it seems to me that we're going through a qualitative evolution here, not merely a quantitative one. That is, you can't just take a time series and just say, oh, I see a pattern in that time series. You need to think more multidimensionally, and more qualitatively. And so how confident are you, say, that a given coin, or Bitcoin itself, the original first mover in the whole area, how do you know which part of this now, which part of this growing ecosystem is the one to play, is the attractive one, where the performance is going to be, and which coins might fail? What elements of this might be left in the dust?
The crypto market is one of these fascinating areas of study. And I think over time, we will look back and we'll have like crypto historians and things like that, because there are some pockets of this market that are unpredictable, that you have no hope of having any qualitative or quantitative ability to know what's happening. The meme coin phenomenon, the dog coin thing. You know, Elon Musk tweets a picture and a Dogecoin goes up, 100%. You can't predict that. So there are pockets of the market that are just irrational beyond all belief. And that's not something that we tend to look at. While there is money to be made there, don't get me wrong, that's not something we look at. I almost take a sociological view onto it, in terms of you've got to think about how we function as a society, whether it be through commerce, communications, money, inclusivity in finance. And so what the approach is that I take is that, okay, well, let's look at the legacy systems that we use for all of these things and start to break down, are they working or are they not working? Do they work for creators? Do they work for, employees? Do they work for corporations? Who do these current legacy systems work for, and where do they contribute economic benefit? And you start to sort of get an appreciation for, especially in the kind of current economic and financial and social environment that we live in, a lot of these legacy centers of controlled, centralized authority and power and capital don't really work for a lot of people out there. So there's an element of the breakdown of what is capitalism, and we're sort of talking about some pretty big ideas here. But then you start to see what some of these potential crypto projects can deliver, and it's almost like the democratization of capitalism, which is a sort of strange concept to get your head around. But it's providing opportunities for people that perhaps previously didn't have opportunities to, whether it be invest in a startup or a startup-like operation, or to generate greater rewards from something they've created as an individual and have greater rights and control over that. So when we talk about crypto, and we can talk about Bitcoin as money, and we can talk about Ethereum as a network, and then people go, oh, but crypto is a big scam. It's like, when you understand the layers and the innovation that's going on, you start to see there's a lot more going on there. It's almost like this explosion of startup culture and entrepreneurialism that lets everyone have a go and potentially generate financial reward from that. And so that's where I see a lot of the excitement, is because it's like you're tapping into the knowledge and brains of a lot more people to generate new ways of doing things, and to the opportunities that presents, I think, are really exciting.
Well, I mean, as you point out, and you're absolutely right to point this out, it's almost as if we wouldn't be here at all if the legacy systems to which you refer were fit for purpose.
Absolutely.
And then it makes you wonder why. What's going on here? And the fact is, you call it a scam. George Gilder, eminent philosopher of information theory and complexity and all of that, he calls it a scandal. That is, he basically believes that the way in which money is introduced into the system and regulated today is a scandal. It is basically, it's clearly highly unstable. We're lurching from one crisis to the next with what seems like an ever shorter period of time between crises, right? Yeah. And it does seem to be a source of structurally rising economic inequality. And of course, you have some people, such as the popular economist Thomas Piketty, who says that is endemic to capitalism, when in fact, if you look at the history of capitalism, it's not endemic to capitalism at all. And in fact, inequality declined during the first and second stages of the Industrial Revolution, according to most economic historians. In any event, I digress a bit, but the important thing is this. You're absolutely right. Why shouldn't bright young people, or bright older people for that matter, see what they can do to try and create and roll out and experiment with a monetary technology that might be better designed, more robust, and simply fairer, such that it can service the marketplace, can serve as a healthy form of growth-oriented capitalism in which everyone can participate. I absolutely buy into that. But there is where you're going to get pushback. But the authorities, let's face it, governments don't like competition, central banks don't like competition, right? Now they'll claim that their very existence is required for society to even function. But then again, a look at history tells you, well, yes and no. It depends what specific roles they are arrogating to themselves. So I'm all for the innovation, but it brings me back to the same point. This is still a huge speculation. How can we more robustly and in a more disciplined way get involved and profit from it?
Yeah, look, there's a couple of things to that. There is a large part of this market that is rampant speculation, and it is speculation that people will buy tokens and crypto and exit those for more dollars or pounds or whatever. I get that, and I understand that that is actually a significant driver of this market, because without that speculation and without that capital inflow, you don't get the innovation, because you don't attract human capital, you don't attract smart people. And I'm pragmatic enough to realize that we still operate in a system where we have to use dollars and pounds in order to pay our bills and to, operate in the world. And the sort of the bigger picture, which we won't dive into too much here, is longer term. And I've said this throughout my entire time covering Bitcoin and crypto, is that this is something that will continue to exist and evolve well beyond our years and everyone watching today. It is truly a multi-generational thing. Having said that, it's the speculation part of it is one thing, but I think it's also important for people to understand this is also an experimentation thing as well. And like you say, if something like Bitcoin wasn't fit for purpose or didn't have some sort of role to play, it wouldn't exist. If central banks were good at their job, we wouldn't be here talking about crypto, because it wouldn't exist. It may do in terms of the decentralization of centralized powers, things like data centers, right, and control of the cloud. You look at control of cloud, literally just cloud services, and it's AWS, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft Azure and Google. They're the three dominating forces, and then a few scattered around. So you've got three major powerhouses controlling basically all the cloud. So there are some aspects of the decentralization and breaking up of those power centers that I think are important to discuss as well at another time. As speculation exists, though, it's important for people to understand how their risk is managed. Like I say, pragmatic enough to know that we still exist in the traditional financial system, but also optimistic enough to know that maybe we're onto something when it comes to this crypto thing that a lot of people still say. Hey Sam, how's that crypto thing going for you? It's good, thanks. So I think the people watching today are smart enough to understand that. I'm not saying, and never have said, this is everything that must be your portfolio and your wealth and your investment, because that's just stupid. This should be a part of your portfolio and your investment that you say, actually, what if this guy's right? What if Bitcoin is a better system of money or a store of value? What if these projects that he's looking at are going to democratize the way that music royalties are paid out, or how we provide provenance for artwork in a multi-billion-dollar global industry? Maybe he's right. And so I think the important thing is that if you've got that element of opportunity and that sniff of something is wrong fundamentally with a lot of the systems in the world today, and that these are, innovative ways of looking at changing that, I think if you're forward-looking enough to see that and get a sense of that, then what we talk about with a lot of the specific crypto players we look at, I think they will resonate with people that we talk to, because they understand that there is change happening and taking place, and that some things aren't working the way that they should. And if these new ways of doing things actually do come out to be quite positive and beneficial, there is opportunity for capital and speculation to take place, but also fundamentally change how we do things. It's like the old adage, how many Blockbuster stores do you see around anymore, right?
Yeah, for sure.
These are the sorts of things that we have to look at and question. You look at Spotify. I bought an Apple Mac the other day, a MacBook, and I spoke to the girl as I was waiting for it, and I said, I've got an old one at home that's got all my MP3s on it. She just like blankly looked at me like, what's an MP3? Because all she knows is streaming. My kids are 4 and 2. All they will know is a world with Bitcoin in it. They don't know a world without Bitcoin. So these are the sorts of things I think people need to think about and say, well, okay, maybe in the next few years this change takes place and I can get in on the ground floor early and have a part in that. And I think that's the exciting part for me.
I mean, you keep coming back to Bitcoin as a point of reference, and that's totally understandable. Would you recommend that those still hesitant to get involved here, if they were to dip their toe in the water, the safe, gentle way to sort of experience the crypto, verse, as it were, whatever you want to call it, is just acquire a little Bitcoin in some way?
Absolutely. I mean, that's how you come into this place. Like Bitcoin's like the gateway into it's the start of the rabbit hole. It's that gate that goes ahead. Now you can dive in. In sort of crypto circles, it's say you're orange pilled. It's like the Bitcoin symbol is orange. If anyone sort of didn't really know. And once you've been orange pilled, then you start to get that natural curiosity of what's going on. So if you're not even sure about it, just you take that first step, and it doesn't have to be big or large or 1,000 quid or anything. You can literally buy 10 quid's worth of Bitcoin, right? And I've shown people time and time again, you can get an app, you can register an account with an exchange, you can buy Bitcoin, literally a couple of clicks. It's super easy compared to what it used to be. It's the best way just to get going in this space.
For sure. But then you also mentioned Blockbuster just a few moments ago. The thing is that just because you have a first mover advantage does not mean you're going to corner a market indefinitely.
Sure. Yeah.
Think Betamax, for example, which everyone agreed at the time, who actually properly compared VHS and Betamax technology. Literally 90% would immediately realize that Betamax had advantages over VHS.
Absolutely.
And yet VHS wins out in the end.
Yeah.
So is there a lesson there? Is there a lesson with Betamax? Is there a lesson with Blockbuster for Bitcoin? That is there going to be, and do you perhaps see somewhere on the horizon an innovation or set of innovations regarding other coins, infrastructure for coins, whatever it might be, which has the potential to eclipse or displace Bitcoin entirely? And is that where people who get more involved here should be looking?
You make a really great point. And you're right, you can't, just because you're first mover doesn't make you the be all and end all. And I think we would be naive to think that, and this is where I don't understand the idea of these Bitcoin maximalists who believe that Bitcoin is the one and only and should be the one and only cryptocurrency. It's like, you've got to kind of open your eyes to the fact that, okay, Bitcoin is fantastic at what it does. It's a first mover. It's really made an impact and disrupted a lot of things. It may not be the answer. In 50 years' time, there may be a better solution that comes out. There also may not be. And we're free to debate where people would sit on that scale. And then there's everything else. So I mentioned Ethereum. They are not the same. They are apples and oranges. And when we talk about crypto, it's almost doing it a disservice because it's a really big catch-all for an industry that is so diverse with a lot of different facets to it and different opportunities in it. And so while Bitcoin is certainly a gateway into that, I think what that then does is it helps people to unlock that thought process of questioning things. And I think that's why my involvement in it has been so long, is that when I first got involved with Bitcoin, I was sort of disenfranchised with how the financial system was working, how the financial advice industry was working in Australia at the time. You come across this and it's very much the antithesis of all of how money works. And it makes you think, what is money? And that's the application I take to a lot of the opportunities in crypto. It makes you think, what is the cloud? What is social networks? What is a virtual world? And how do we how do we communicate with each other?
Well, this becomes a dangerous rabbit hole because the fact is you're asking such fundamental questions. You can literally reach back into philosophy as far back as you want. And you can see these questions being asked or addressed, and certainly in many cases misunderstood. You know, you can go back and see all these misconceptions about money in philosophy and the ethics thereof and everything else. I mean, gosh, to go all the way back, even in Hammurabi's code, you see a reference to a rudimentary monetary system. Aristotle comes up with arguably the first theory of money in the Western philosophical tradition. But in any event, I digress a little bit. But these questions only lead to more questions for most people. And I assume you receive your fair share of those.
Yeah, loads. You know, it's you're right. You mentioned the rabbit hole, and it is a rabbit hole. It's like anything you want to research and you get a sniff of and an excitement about. You go down that rabbit hole, and it leads to more questions, and it should lead to more questions. So that helps you to deepen your knowledge about it. The thing that people always want to know, though, is that this is somewhat of an existential threat to central banks, to centralized power, and like you rightly said before, you get a lot of pushback from that. And so the number one question I get is why don't governments just ban it? If they ban it, if they cut us off from it, then what can we do? If the bank says you can't send money to an exchange anymore, what can we do? If there's a central bank digital currency that's pre-programmed to stop you from sending your money to a crypto exchange, what can we do? Which are all valid questions and good questions that I've had for the last 10 years. The CBDC thing, not so much, but what if governments ban it? There's two sides to this. Yep, the government could ban it. And if they ban it and they make it illegal to hold Bitcoin or whatever, that's a problem. But while they might do that, and so China's banned this before, there are regions that have banned it before and unbanned it before and then banned it again. There are other regions in the world that take a more proactive approach. We've seen that in El Salvador, we've seen that in a few South American countries, some African countries, typically developed nations that have economic issues of themselves, have started to be a little bit open and freer with this. So what I've always said is that you find that there is there's a competition here, because some powers will say that this is a threat to us, and some, as we see in Singapore, for instance, Hong Kong starting to open up a bit more to it, and parts of Europe, is that they see this as an opportunity. If they all universally decided as one to ban it, then I'm not going to lie, we're probably up that creek without a paddle.
Right.
But I also counter with, when has every government in the world all coordinated to agree on one thing in the history of mankind? I don't think ever, as far as I can
Well, the closest we come to is the Pax Americana at the end of the Second World War. That's kind of the closest we ever get, right?
Yeah.
And even that, look around the world today.
Exactly.
You know, that is clearly going through some sort of regime change, and multipolarity is in the ascendancy. And that's not to suggest the United States is suddenly going to become a powerless country. No, they'll still have more influence than any other. But the disproportionate influence is clearly on the wane, as is natural.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, if you look to the US, so the US is getting very heavy-handed in terms of regulation on the crypto sector right now. All it's doing is just pushing a lot of organizations offshore. And when I say offshore, it's not like into like dodgy, weird kind of tax haven, sketchy.
I know what you mean. It's like the Eurodollar market, or innovation in international capital flows have always taken place in friendly jurisdictions.
Absolutely. And like Coinbase, right? Coinbase is looking at relocating out of the US to Europe or the UK. So the countries that see this as an opportunity go, actually, okay, well, if they're going to do that, why don't we just sort of encourage this? And this is what happens. And it's happened. So the other thing about crypto is that it really is a free, open market. Things are allowed to fail and do fail regularly. That's okay, and it's sort of maybe something the traditional financial system could maybe take into account. I've always said, in 2008, if a lot of those banks actually were allowed to fail, I wonder if we'd be in this mess sort of that we're in at the moment. Again, questions that we could talk about another time. So, the sort of crypto and the banning of it and the regulation and all these things that people are terrified of. You can be terrified about those. You could have been terrified about those in 2013 when I was talking about this and people were asking, is the government going to ban it? And if you'd have been terrified about it for the last 10 years, you've really missed out on a massive opportunity. So you can live your life in fear and worry about that. about the potential of that coming. But at the moment, it's not, right? It's not banned, and it's not regulated out of existence. And you know, if I wanted to send you Bitcoin, I don't have to go through payment rails with Swift, or they're not really rails, but anyway, I don't have to go through, you know, interbank transfers, and we don't have to go through the banking system. I can just send you Bitcoin, and it's outside of that system. So even in that, when Bitcoin first started, it was peer-to-peer. Its white paper is a peer-to-peer network. These are the things that once you are orange pilled and you go down the rabbit hole, you realize that a lot of this is peer-to-peer. It's outside of those centralized structures and infrastructures, and creating new infrastructures where you don't need intermediaries and middlemen and all those things that do regulate and put blocks in place and push people into isolation. Those don't exist, and that creates a much freer way to exist and to transact and to create commerce.
Well, I can imagine why not only yourself, but lots of people get passionate about this topic, because it really does kind of go there. It goes into how people feel about the trade-off that invariably is going to exist in society between authoritarian top-down and spontaneous bottom-up. The fact is, I think very few people would argue that society can work 100% bottom-up with no central authority for anything, even a code of law, say, and yet who wants to live in one that is 100% top-down? That tends to get very unpleasant.
There's something in the middle there, right?
Right.
Or maybe not even in the middle, maybe.
Yeah, but and also
lower quadrant.
And maybe it's dynamic. Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe as new technologies and new ways of learning and thinking move in and out of society, it fluctuates a little bit. And I think you kind of see that when you look back at history. But I can understand why people get passionate about it. It's clearly a passion of yours. I'm absolutely certain you're going to keep writing about it
Yep.
at every available opportunity.
Yeah.
There's no shortage of opportunities out there. For purposes of this discussion, is there anything specific that you want to mention before we close?
Yeah, I mean, so we're looking very much at really specific opportunities in this market. Like I've said before, I've spoken a lot about sort of quite big picture things about how we, you know, interact in terms of commerce and social networks and all these sorts of things. But when you drill down into it, and as I said before, there are a lot of opportunities in this sector. It's like, again, I used the Blockbuster example before. You know, when Netflix started out, they delivered DVDs through a door, but they evolved and they expanded and they realized opportunities. They pivoted and they were flexible. They were a speedboat where Blockbuster was a giant sea cargo container ship. The speedboats are what we look for in the crypto sector, where they can, you know, continue to innovate. They can, you know, pivot. They can move. They can expand and grow. And there are a lot of opportunities in that sector for different areas, like I say, sports, music, data and how we share and access data, even things like structured finance and access to finance for small businesses. There's so many really specific opportunities in crypto. And there are three at the moment I've red hot on that I really love, and that I really want to share with people and help them to understand how these things move, why they're speedboats, and how they become bigger speedboats, how they become luxury yachts, if you will. And so it's exciting. Like you say, I get passionate about it because I think fundamentally at heart, I love to question authority. And when you look at some of these things that are in development, that's what they do, and they say, well, we can do this better in a way that benefits those that are forward-looking enough to come in and say, I think I agree with you.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Sam.
Pleasure.
There you have it, from Sam Volkering, all things crypto, blockchain, and of course specifically Bitcoin. He's going to be staying on top of it. I'll be following his work, and I'm sure you will too. Once again, I'm John Butler, Investment Director at Southbank Investment Research.